Welcome to the coffee club. Unfortunately, Rebecca has other duties this week, so it's just Eric and myself, and we were just talking before we went live that it's going to be a little bit weird because we are spending an awful lot of time together at the moment, collaborating on other topics, and it's like, how are we just going to avoid having another discussion about the projects we're working on together? But I figure we will find a way. So, in the true spirit of finding a way, other than all the hours you spent collaborating with me, Eric, what were the highlights of your week?
Oh, I think the highlight of my week is getting a little bit of that feel of creation again. Like it's been a while since I've gotten the feel of being in the zone on something and just putting my head down and cranking things out. Sometimes it's really nice to find that again. The opposite side of that, and maybe even the cause of that, is the reminding myself of the intentionality and importance of taking breaks and taking a day off of creating every now and then, or leaving the computer and going for a walk when I'm beating my head against a wall instead of trying to push through the wall. Um, I think those have been the highlights professionally of the week. Personally, yeah, it's been great weather here, sunshine, beaches, good clean air. So it's been a lovely week of just being more time outside and remembering the joys of nature.
Nice.
What about you, Mark?
Look, personally, I'll say daughter is visiting from Sydney this weekend, which will be an absolute highlight because
Nice.
we miss her. Professionally, it's probably been just really geeking out on the power of cohort-based training and just how different it is and the opportunities.
That sounds like a interesting segue and potentially lengthy conversation.
So
um, let's go.
So I'll confess, I had never actually deliberately thought about it until you started sharing with me last year about your Unleashing Scale leadership development program. And it's weird. A few months ago, for some random reason, I was sitting there thinking, how many training courses have I delivered in my life? Um, and I pretty easily got to maths that said 500 plus. And then I went, yeah, if I got harder with the maths, maybe to get to 1,000 courses. But a training course was always 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days. And pre-COVID, it was those days, people in a room, captive attention. And so it was just when I thought of training, I thought of multiple days in on end of people in a room.
Yep.
And this whole idea of, well, maybe it's not multiple days. To be honest, when you started talking to me about it, did my head in. Had you done cohort style training before you started dreaming up Unleashing Scale?
Um, Depends on how much you squint, I think is the right answer. So a lot of corporate work, a lot of the coaching work is structured sharing over a period of time, whether it's in a one-on-one mentoring or whether it's in a group mentoring session. A lot of communities of practice are actually kind of cohort-based training when you start to orchestrate and lead and be the maybe this isn't the recommended way of going about it, but kind of the dominant speaker or sharer at a community of practice as part of getting one moving. So that's squint level cohort based. And then, frankly, just my wife being a college professor and over the years watching her go through her doctorate of education and build training for college students, adult students. Um, a lot of those programs are once a week cohort based ongoing things. So it's not that I've led them and shaped them and designed them. It's more that they were just around me. And it never startled me to think of them that way. A lot of adult continuing education is cohort based over a longer period of time. It just wasn't something I led in the professional space.
I think as I listen to you I went, yeah, I do have some biases because the parallel to the way college or university works is pretty easy.
Hmm.
Um, but I'm quite a cynic about college and university education, creativity, and quality.
Hmm.
um,
Well, I had the joy of being in a small engineering school where it was phenomenal. So I don't have that negative bias.
yes, my experience left with a very negative bias. And I think most of the bias was that it felt so impractical. I was working part time in industry, I was going to lectures, and the lectures felt like they were 10 years behind the things that I was working on in industry. um, and it's interesting that you think of coaching engagements through that lens of cohort, because I would never have thought of coaching sessions as training. I mean, I get the idea that perhaps in a community of practice, you might be more in a dominant speaker mode at times and in a kind of active teaching and mentoring stance. But it's probably one of the pieces for me as I think about the cohort based approach has been the fact that you get to blend a lot more, particularly I would say mentoring
Hmm.
style into what you do. Because I had a lot of years where, well, really always, I've believed if you train people without follow up coaching, you're wasting your time training them.
I think that's close to how I feel about it. And I think my framing of that is the training value if people aren't able to immediately apply what they learned is significantly reduced, like perhaps close to zero.
Oh, so 1000% agree with they've got to be able to instantly apply it.
Hmm. And then the
Um,
mentoring part just depends on their peer availability, whether they're surrounded by other people trying to learn it, can learn from each other, or whether they actively need more support outside and so on. Topic dependent, nuance dependent.
yeah, look, I'd taken a very strong stance over the years that I would not sell training courses to an organization separate from coaching services unless
Uh,
I knew that they had adequate in-house coaching. And then I'd go out of my way to say, hey, look, send your in-house coaches to sit in the training room, because
mhm.
we're going to create a lot of conversation threads for them to follow.
Have you ever trained or taught outside of a professional software space?
Don't think so.
Yeah, because that might be interesting. Because, like I said, I've been exposed to the adult education space extensively in continuing programs. I ran a martial arts school for a number of years, and that's certainly training and coaching and mentoring all rolled up into one parental figure relationship for many of these kids.
Yeah.
Um, and then obviously the professional training, both as an architect and free agile coaching training, and then that obviously the last 15 years in agile in one flavor or another. Um, and I'm just curious because like how much of my bias is shaped by the variety of different what ifs that I bring to mind versus always picturing a bunch of software people or a bunch of agile leadership people or what have you.
Look, I've certainly trained plenty of audiences in the safe space where there wasn't a technologist in the room.
Hmm.
And that was, I guess, why I paused when you said outside the software development space. Uh, because if I generalized it and said, have I ever taught outside the product development space?
Yeah,
Uh, at that point, that would be it. You know,
or outside the corporate space might even be a
well, I've trained in small clients as well.
yeah.
So, but it was definitely, it was an interesting trigger uh, when you told me about it. I went, that's cool. That sounds like a very effective way of approaching a long term gig, but I
Mhm.
didn't rethink my training. Uh, it was more I'll watch that with curiosity.
I mean, that sounds like, what is it? Wisdom is learning from your mistakes, intelligence is learning from others.
Well, absolutely, right. Um, and, and there was a piece of it, I think, where although there are many things that I will never thank COVID and lockdowns for, they have also taught us to do new things because training was always in a room for me. Um, I'd been asked by clients at various times to telepresence people in. I'd telepresence in some very fancy setups, and I'd always hated it. But COVID taught us, it forced us to grow in virtual collaboration and virtual engagement. And I think that was probably another piece of the puzzle in the unlock was I no longer have to batch training up into when I can get everybody together
Mhm.
and what flights are needed or anything else. It was much easier to schedule sort sessions. And then I almost I deliberately ran an experiment with it, which I wasn't thinking of so coherently as training at the time when I ran a facilitation series late last year. By that time, you lost some energy around the Unleashing Scale project. So I clearly wasn't going to learn from your mistakes in the short term. And had a group of folks and went, yep, I want to take you on a facilitation journey and let's do it week by week. And it instantly just blew me away because you could just give them a little bit of information and then send them away. They'd do something with it the next day, over the next week. And then you process that with them the following week. And you created this just beautiful learning loop, which couldn't get over the power of it. And and that was kind of the trigger to go, let's go deep. Right. Couldn't every course be a cohort based training course?
Nothing like somebody with a shiny new tool.
Well, absolutely. I love a shiny new toy. Uh, yeah.
That's interesting. Like, because I think back, and another piece of this, and you mentioned the ongoing mentoring piece of it and the evolution over time. And I think back to my like first encounters with formal training. The 2-day box training was actually nowhere near the beginning of my career, nowhere near my first professional education experiences. Um, and I think I'm trying to think back, and it's like arguably the first time I was ever in a room, in a training room, I was running the training. Like I'd never even attended any
Yeah.
as a professional. My first role at SEP, we had a internal academy because we actually believed, and as a consultancy even followed through on creating learning and expectation that our people were getting better. That was our only way of surviving as a local small contract house in a sea of large integrators.
Yeah.
And like I taught courses there. I remember taking a class on Perl that was a 6 or 8 week series, and you'd have homework assignments, and Raman would gently, kindly, but brutally tell you why your code was horrible and why you probably shouldn't implement an entire ultimate tournament app in a single function. Cough. I was learning a little bit of program structure in that process. Um, and I remember, I forget exactly what I taught, but I taught some logic thinking courses. I taught a handful of things. And it was always something you did with your friends over a period of time when it was my experience of training it as an adult once I got out of the school space. And at the same time as when I was running the martial arts school, it was sessions, it was an ongoing relationship with each and every student. And you were like, there's a sense of loss when somebody left, when you lost a student, especially in the inner city where it was sometimes they would never be seen again. It's like Just like, oh, kid disappeared. I miss him. I hope he's okay. Um, and then when I get into the 2-day training box, it was very strange. Like I didn't know what to do with it. And I was learning from some of the masters like Colin Bird, and Simon Bennett, and Carl Scotland, and Kanchango. Like was my shadowing and learning experience.
Yeah, mine was a very long time ago. It was probably 1993, 1994. And I was thinking, and I went, I don't think I'd ever been in a multi-day training course before I taught one. And weirdly enough, I was teaching a room full of DBAs, and oh, you can date it because Windows was new, right? I think it was Windows 3. Uh, all of a sudden, everybody was running Windows and figuring out how to use software that they could develop on Windows or run in Windows. And we picked up this database that at the time it was a competitor to SQL Server. It was called Interbase. Um, and it it was very powerful, very poorly documented, and very challenging. And it was from Borland, and we kept running into glitches with it. And I would ring the local Borland people, and they would go, "Sorry, got no clue." And then I found a forum on CompuServe which had experts in it, and I would go and sleuth that forum or ask questions in that forum, and then I would figure out answers, and I'd ring the local Borland people and say, "Hey, this is the answer," uh, just so you know, for another client. And we'd had a pattern of this for probably 18 months, and one day they went, "Hey, Mark, we've got a client who needs some training, and would you be willing to train them?" And I went, never trained before. And they went, "Well, you obviously know more about this than anybody else in Australia, and we've got the training course." And actually, the appeal at the time was to go, "Oh, I might learn something new when they send me the courseware." Uh, because I read all the
Of
reference
course it
books.
was. Yeah. So you haven't changed.
No. And, I panicked and I studied and I prepped and then I taught it and I loved it. Um, but, you know, uh, it's been a journey. But there's, I think the thing, and this is what really has been striking me about it, is, so much of my training in recent years has been safe training. And those safe courses are just jammed. There's so much information. And, I'll regularly look around if it's a 2-day course and somewhere around the middle of the afternoon on the second day, I'll look at people coming back in for the coffee break going, I've got to get them to the end. And you look out at the room and you go, yeah, well, we've been through a lot over the last day and mostly almost 2 days. Let me just check where your heads are so I can sense what we're going to do in this rest of this time together. And I'll use my hands and I go, how full are you feeling, right? Still got a little bit of room, full, drowning in new stuff. And the number of people who will, we're drowning. You've fed us so much stuff. And I'm like, well, if I was being a responsible trainer, I've got 60 more slides to talk about. Um, and so, you've got this kind of just jam people's head full of so much stuff. And usually I've been very careful to make sure they're going to have a chance to apply it instantly when they leave the room. But how much of it are they going to get to apply before they forget it?
Mhm. And that's challenging with any learning. I mean, there's a model out there I value called Kirkpatrick's 4-step process for something like that. But it's basically just, did the student show up? Does the student learn anything? Did the student retain it? Did the student actually use it? I split one of them inappropriate. And the fourth one is, did you get the impact to the business
Yeah.
as expected? And see, I probably have this. within one or two clicks of being able to properly share. But I that's the part I really struggle with any training is this actually connected to something that's going to have impact and accomplish a goal? Because I deeply value curiosity driven learning.
Yeah.
Go figure out 1,000 things, read a book a week, whatever feels good. But when it's pushed training, when it's not opt in, when it's team based or train based training, suddenly it's like, well, are we getting the impact that we're looking for from this towards some goal, and do we understand what goals we're even pursuing in the process? Um, I also got distracted trying to figure out whatever happened to Borland. Some of those companies that just kind of disappeared from view, and I'm like, what happened to them? Turns out they went to became part of Micro Focus and then got acquired into Open Text.
They got acquired multiple times. The
Yeah.
main thing that happened to Borland was that tried they got egotistic and decided to position themselves as a competitor to Microsoft.
Including a C sharp builder tool, I remember,
Yeah, look,
to compete with Visual Studio.net.
that was long after they jumped the shark. Um, the thing that really crushed them was, they built, their brand was built on having the best C compiler on the market, and they were the Pascal guys.
Mhm.
And then they went, we need an alternative to Office. And they weren't the only ones who did this, right? But they had a spreadsheet product, they had a word processor product. This was back when you actually chose a word processor.
Mhm.
Because I hated Word, I was a Word perfect guy. Um, and they went and they splashed a lot of money trying to position a suite of Office alternatives. And they lost sight of, you know, in Jim Collins
Yeah.
terms, they lost sight of the hedgehog.
Yeah. Which is, I mean, but to be fair, that was back when it was feasible to compete.
Oh,
Like,
it was. They didn't have the
it's,
scale or the differentiation. Um,
anyway,
because it's,
bring us.
anyway, that's a
Yeah,
distraction.
I'll bring us back. So the Kirkpatrick was reaction learning behavior results. Were they satisfied and present in the training? Did they learn anything? Did they change their behavior? And did that actually have the business results?
Yeah,
And I think back like at Rally, like all of our most of our training. I mean, we still ran some like open product owner, Scrum Master type classes
yeah,
of various degrees of certification, but the bread and butter was the launch events, team launch, team or art launch type things of get a team as an intervention from wherever they are to a healthier place.
yeah,
And training was a piece of that, but so was workshopping, so was workflow design, so was deep coaching and mentoring, either in a 2-day package or a 10-day package, and supporting people through that journey in the healthiest possible way.
yeah.
Ditto, frankly, with all the Kanban work. Kanban system design. We didn't have Kanban training. We had system design class. So
And that's over the years, I've worked incredibly hard to say that's the responsible way to use safe training. Um, and I've been quite unpopular in a few places because, it's been a safe implementation. We've done a very structured timing on our training of just in time, just in context.
mhm.
Uh, and then you get this moment where, a whole bunch of people around the organization go, I need to be safe trained. And it's like, no,
Not yet.
not yet, right?
Hmm.
Uh, and sometimes they don't really like that answer. And, I've had a couple of moments where, I've pushed back and somebody else has come in and said, I'd love to see your training. It's good money. Um, and been quite interesting on the basis of it.
Yeah.
But
Well, I always love Cheryl's answer to that, and she talked about this one of the years at Summit, so I think it's open domain. But she did a good job saying, "Yeah, we hear you. And here's the free, easier stuff you can actually learn that's on our like built into our e-learning as a corporate platform. Go do this first.
Yeah.
And that'll give you the basics." And that planted some beautiful seeds, and you started to see some spontaneous acts of agility. And later, when it was time to organize, that's when the formal training happened.
Yeah.
And that actually was a pretty healthy habit. And scratch that itch, people had to be involved and have a clue whatever, like there's this thing happening is usually what the underlying is, not I really want safe training. It's like I don't want to miss out on this.
Yeah.
So that was interesting to me watching that dynamic play through.
Yeah. It's quite a journey. But if I kind of zoom back to what really has cohort top of mind for me at the moment is, teaching my product owner course cohort based. And it's a 2 hour session every week and there's homework. And in the early days, the homework was light and there was, 10, 15 minutes of post processing, the start of the next session. What you do with your homework, um, reconnects to last week, maybe a couple of extra questions or insights come out. But we've been down the meaty end. And going in yesterday was meant to be the penultimate session. And
One
I
of my
was
favorite words.
second to last if we go to plain English. And I was pretty excited. There was some nice content for it. And I'd been debating about managing the time box because I'd also set some pretty meaty homework the week before. The homework had been take one of the features that you're taking into PI planning a month from now, um, and either use BDD to flash out the acceptance criteria for it
Mhm.
or create a story map. So it was a choice based thing.
Yeah, makes sense because can whether it's a standalone or a process based. Yeah.
And I got into the office. I was in the morning in the office doing various coaching sessions. I'm like, can't see any of the product owners in the office. And, one of the things we've done it deliberately in person, and it's been here's a hook. The return
Hmm.
for being in the office on Tuesdays, you get this session with Mark. And they've all been coming. And I could only see one product owner on the floor. And I checked in and somebody said, oh, no, no, they'll come in this afternoon. They'll be working from home this morning. They'll come in at lunchtime. That's what a lot of them have been doing. Like, okay. And then I'm in the lunchroom and I still can't see them. And I get into the room and I have two product owners in the room and everybody else has dialed in. Like, no, I'm not going to do that because if I was going to teach it virtually, I would have been teaching it from home with my entire home kit and with a well prepared mirror as opposed to a well prepared pile of post-its and index cards. And so I said, look, let's just process homework. Right? We'll save the teaching for when we can do the teaching properly next week. And it turned out, fresh waves of COVID and life. Um, so we started processing homework. We spent the entire 2 hours processing homework because they'd all gone away and engaged and had a real crack at taking the stuff we'd done in the exercises in the room and applying it to something they were working on. And they're incredible teaching moments for every single piece of homework.
Right.
Uh, and and I got to the end, I was like, wow, that was phenomenal. And it was just a brilliant teaching session. And I went back and I was reflecting on the train home last night. And it's just like building coaching into training, right? Because there's the theory in the room and you can do all the exercises you love, and I love to do exercises in the room. But it's only when they try and do it on something in their real world that, rubber hits the road. Because there's so much you can learn in a 15, 20-minute time box for an exercise, which is very different to a multi-hour time box on some real work.
Mhm.
And oh, so we're actually deliberately mixing teaching and coaching. And that is very, very cool.
I wonder. The one I'm famous, infamous, occasionally sanctioned for vaguely waving my hand at the slide sequence and the time boxes, and generally just teaching to the engagement of the room,
Yeah.
which is part of, frankly, leading executive classes. Regardless, like it's not about the certs; it's about the
Yeah, absolutely.
helping them see the path to what big change they're going to make, and it's actually more of a workshop than a training class.
Yeah.
But I'm probably guilty of treating the vast majority of my training classes as workshops.
Oh, yeah. Guilty as charged.
Um, but I still, despite that, frequently struggle with the tension between using a canned exercise and using their real context, real stories, real work items, real initiatives, what have you. And I always go back and forth because there's the ability to steer which insights are had with canned material versus open the aperture for unexpected but maybe not quite relevant learning and deep dives and swirling and it turning into a prioritization debate for the enterprise and forgetting that you're actually in a class and all the other things that come with opening the door on their real work because they take it seriously because it's relevant and often depending on the people coaching hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars worth of things under discussion.
I,
So
I,
where do you fall on that? How do you think about
I,
that in a
I,
normal
I,
course and then in a cohort one, of course, the homework, of course, is their real stuff.
so in any course, cohort, real, in the room, homework, I would say 9 times out of 10, if not 90 times, 99 times out of 100, I will be in their world. And, if I'm designing it, I will design exercises that the beginning exercises find me things in their world we can explore. And the
Mhm.
later exercises will trigger various types of exploration of those things.
Right.
Uh, there are occasions where I will. So if you take and the the terrific transport corporation, and let's take that right because you've got at least the in the safe world, you've got the agile product management course, you've got safer architects, uh, both built around this idea of actually saying we've got a coherent end-to-end scenario that provides continuity between the various aspects of the course and allows you to feel like you're doing a fairly realistic unpack of the way that various pieces of the puzzle glue together. And when that came out in agile product management, I was like, this is really cool. But by the
Came out
same
in architecture
token,
first, by the way.
um, yeah, okay, you would know more than me. I became aware of it much more clearly through APM than architecture.
Oh, it was just so much fun to build too.
Yeah. And I was like, this is nice, but I would use it lightly because I would want to sit in the real world. Because to me, the real world was so much more powerful. Um, I think I've had one course where I really sat in using it. Um, and that was a course where there was a group of people I knew were very stuck. And I went, you know what, if we just take them completely out of their world, then putting them in this entirely different context is going to free some thinking. Um, but yeah, their world, their world, their world. That's what makes it
I wonder
real.
if there's I wonder if there's a space of like introducing the simulation world pausing and having people, okay, find the parallels to your real world because we're going to keep stay over here so we don't get too stuck because you know this other space too well. But find the parallels now so that you can't escape them as we go through the exercises.
So
I wonder if there's a way to have it both ways.
in the world of have your cake and eat it too, I think the other aspect that really creeps into that though is the time box.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the reflection I really had last night was, the more time you can spend in their world, the more time you can spend in activities applying techniques against their world, the more time you can spend on the whiteboard helping them visualize their world, the better. But at the end of the day, in any kind of training context, whether it's 2 days or 2 hours, you've got a time box and you've got to manage your time box.
Yep.
And so you've got to work out, how much of the discussion is relevant for it to kind of hit people, and you've got to move on. And, I will orient towards probably, in my design material, I want 50 to 60% of the time spent in the room to be spent in applied activities. Probably often I'd lean to more than that in terms of the time that I'm delivering an idea versus the time people are internalizing the idea.
Hmm.
But they're still fairly constrained time boxes. And that's where I think the homework or the side project becomes real because, they take it and they spend 2 or 3 hours, particularly if it can be apply this to something you're working on. So it's legitimate work, it's not just homework. And, what happens when you get that free time box for the application? Huge. So, yeah, I'm geeking out on it a bit at the moment. And of course, I'm doing the me thing and I'm in the tunnel of what are the best ways to optimize cohort-based courses and um, seeing all kinds of new ideas that will tweak it.
Thing. I'm now playing with the idea of like, what would cohort-based workshops look like? Like, step away from the course idea. I mean, learning is important. I value education, but I've also like, the more I look at it, like I could take just about any of the courses I've taught over the last 10 years, and for any given audience, pick out the 20 slides that are going to be most relevant to them out of several hundred.
Yeah.
And take those 20 slides and build a 2-day experience around those 20 slides. And it would be a better, in more service to the actual progress of those organizations and what they're trying to achieve.
Let's
And like every time I do that, it's like I want to get into the real work. I want it to actually have outcomes. And I love your idea. Come out with a story map or a fully developed BDD set of acceptance criteria
yeah.
because that builds the skills and leaves them with an artifact that they can use and a feeling of accomplishment that they've actually created something useful for their day-to-day work, and they get that little hit of positivity and use of the new stuff. I mean, it's like going to a jewelry making class at the local art museum, and I came back with a interesting piece of jewelry and a little piece of abstract art to go with it. And it's like I felt much better about wire shaping and wire bending than if I had just talked about it or practiced or whatever. How do we make sure that people get that engagement so that it's driving behavior change too? In a
So,
cohort-based environment, in a perhaps a less group of product owners from one company and more like abstract group of people coming from different places, different contexts.
so the probably the first thing I want to probe there is, the line between course and workshop. And it's felt to me in a couple of past conversations we've had that you draw the line in a different place to where I draw the line.
Quite
Um,
possibly.
and, the thing that springs to mind is when I built my Lean Portfolio Management Bootcamp,
Mhm.
right? In my head, that was a course. It, it was a course where you spent far more time applying ideas and building pictures of your own world than looking at PowerPoint slides. but it was a course, and you looked at it and you went, "That's a beautiful workshop."
Hmm.
So where would you draw the line?
Is the primary goal more about the individual's learning and insights, or is it more about the collective or individual outcomes that are produced during the experience? And which one takes precedence when trade-offs must occur? Must occur.
I would argue that any good trainer who doesn't have a certification exam expectation hanging over their head is going to apply that lens to a training course.
Which you
Y-
say I didn't follow that.
So if you think about your, what trade-off decisions you making, what's your real goal,
Hmm.
right? I I would argue that in any situation for me where there wasn't a, you know, you're going to go and sit a certification exam waiting,
Yeah, so take certification off.
take certification off
That's
the table. I think, the outcome and the reality for the individual or the group should always override the teaching of a particular set of material.
so let's get specific. If I look back to my rally coaching teaching days,
Yep.
we had a product owner course and we had a implementing the agile team workshop. They both had slides. They both had deeply interactive materials. They both were wonderfully coaching and interactive. But the product owner course, its specific goal is to create product owners that were better able to do their jobs.
Yep.
There was no output from the workshop that was a deliverable of the workshop other than the improved skills of the product owners.
Okay. Now I'm getting it.
But if I
Yeah.
look over to the team based class workshop, there were slides. Many of them actually were the same slides that were in the product owner for the basics and fundamentals of Scrum.
Yeah.
Um, but nobody cared if we actually delivered any of those slides so long as the team came out understanding how they would behave in this new world and convinced and willing to try and engage and lean into this new way of doing things. And that was the actual outcome.
Right.
If I look at a portfolio, it's like there's a portfolio class, which is about helping people learn the new techniques for managing portfolios in a lean environment. And then there's a boot camp, which is helping an organization set up their new way of working in a lean portfolio way, which, by the way, requires educating on a few topics. But we'll skip some stuff there if it helps us get to the goal of operating in the new way right now. So that's how I think of the line.
Right. So it's the orientation of the output.
Is the outcome individual, or is it a collective creation slash production? I have an epic writing workshop.
Yeah.
I'm not going to spend a half day training people how to write epics. I can spend 10 minutes on that, 20 minutes on that. Although maybe I should. But the outcome is a well written epic, and a bunch of people understand the process.
Okay. So you're trading between skills and energy and some kind of created thing.
Progress, for lack of a better term. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can work with that. It's an interesting lens to put on it when you're designing. Hmm.
And it's really when I work with transformation leaders, what I'm getting at when I say, what's your goal with this thing you're asking me to come deliver? Are you really trying to advance the knowledge of these 28 potential Epic owners and their knowledge of how Safe's LPM and Epics work? Or are you really trying to get this big database replacement, upskilling thing moving because it's been constraining, creating pain for all your executives and everybody's very kerfuffled how to get started on it?
I
And
think
sometimes I've learned the difference halfway through the first day.
I think I sneakily try and do both in most training courses.
Yeah, manifesto, but we're going to go manifesto style. When the two are in conflict, we prefer the one on the left.
I
I'm not trade.
just had flashbacks to a leading safe. I did. Ah, must be 3 years ago now, and it was a company that they weren't using Safe. They were using a classic homemade, help by an advisory mashup blend of many.
Hmm.
And when I'd started working with them, they had all kinds of people doing random Safe courses, and it was causing more confusion than anything else.
Hmm.
And one of the first things I did was to say, let's stop all these random Safe courses. You're spending money and time, and they are just creating confusion. Let's not do any more Safe courses in the organization unless you've got a very clear reason for doing
Hmm.
one. Um, which caused some interesting reactions in the locals because they had a whole bunch of their internal coaches who thought they should have been doing Safe, and they went, "Oh, Mark's coming now. We're going to start doing Safe. People are going to take these classes more seriously."
Yep, they're going to take those classes more seriously. All right, and they're only going to take them when they're serious.
but no, I got hit up, and it was a group taking on just a massive program of work, and they were very stuck in their thinking because they were trying to do it agile. They'd set it all up in classic work streams, and it was going to be a long time before anybody saw any value from it. And they went, you know, the executive who was sponsoring it and was reporting to the board on her progress sponsoring it, was very keen and open, and it was getting her leadership team kind of the next two layers below her. And they came and they went, Mark, she's really open. She just needs a great conversation with her leadership about what lean and agility at scale looks like to start getting some mental breakthroughs. Would you teach them a leading safe? And I went, you know my views on teaching safe courses in this organization. And I know you know them very well. So walk me through your thinking because you knew what my first answer was going to be. And they went, look, they just need a springboard for a conversation.
Mhm.
Um, and we think leading safe provides the topic arc. And I went, all right. So if we tackle this a little bit more deeply, we'd be explicit that although we'll pay for the licenses because we're good corporate citizens, there will be no exam. Um, and if any of the attendees wants to do the exam, they will have to do a very significant amount of study.
Yep.
Uh, and that nobody should be expecting us to actually look at every slide in the deck. And I'll set it up that way. And I think we were in the room for 2 days, and I probably had slides on the screen for 3.5 hours of those 2 days.
Yep.
Um, we had a lot of fun, great conversation.
Yeah. And that to me is what an executive leading safe looks like.
Yeah.
And I actually, fascinatingly, like more than any other teaching experience, those stand out as very specific and interesting memories. And they're the ones that every single one of them has a CTO or a CIO or a pile of senior vice presidents or some variation of that theme in the room,
Yeah.
because that's where the impact is. Meanwhile, the 2 dozen generic awareness leading safes that I ran for one client one year, I don't remember anything except for the room itself
Yeah.
and that room's relationship to the cafeteria and the fact that it was basically my permanently assigned training room. Like it was my home.
Yeah,
And
I
they
remember the first time I did those awareness ones.
they're different classes.
They are very different
They might
classes.
have the same slides. And this is kind of what I'm getting at with when I talk about training versus workshop. I can run a leading safe workshop.
Yeah.
And it's not about the cert. It's not about finishing all the education. It's about creating a group of leaders who has coalesced around how they're going to lead a new train or something like that, which is different than having a group of leaders who are prepared to go lead a train. And that clarity of learning outcome, it's kind of like In a certain way, it's like BDD for training. What are you going to be able to do when you're done? What will be true as a result of this training? And I think maybe, and I might get on a little bit of a soapbox here. Is there? No soapbox.
You could always just pump
Just
your chair up a bit.
just a gaming. Yes, I'm gonna go up on my soapbox, and I'm gonna achieve that with camera effects. um, but like, I think the purpose behind running the playbook, like the implementation roadmap, was actually a brilliant introduction. It made things so much clearer for people
Oh, so much.
until it became mechanical. And then it became a script to follow, and people stopped thinking about using it as a tool to communicate the why behind what they're doing, and it just became the thing you went and did. And I think it's when I encounter people who can't tell me the reasoning behind what they're doing with a training regime that I get most worried and sad if they're professionally credentialed.
Yes, couldn't agree more.
So it's interesting thinking about what a cohort-based leading safe workshop might be. Not that I could ever deliver that with the current licensing structure, but conceptually, it's fun to think about.
Conceptually. Like, it was funny, I think it was Nico was saying when he was doing his SPCT, he had a group, I think it was the Scrum Master course. It was either the Scrum Master course or the Product Owner course, one of those kind of role-based courses. And there was some practicality reason that said they couldn't run it back to back over 2 days. So they basically just taught the course over 6 weeks or something like that.
Mhm.
Uh, and, did nothing to the course other than to go, we're going to break it up into individual sessions. And he said he got the highest feedback on that course that he'd ever got and
Yeah,
felt like it had the most impact that he'd ever seen from it by switching it into a series of sessions as opposed to doing it as a big batch.
I think there's well understood adult learning theory in there.
Yeah.
Like that is not surprising to me in any way.
No. It's, maybe we just geek for a second. If you geek for a second and you go, we're talking about the batch size of training and maybe suggesting that there was a period of time when the transaction cost of getting people together drove us towards the larger batch of the multi-day course, and that maybe the economics have changed.
Um, Having had this conversation before in a handful of different environments, um, I don't know that I want to have it right now. Because it goes pretty deep. As soon as you start to dive into this, there's the impact, absorbability, frequency domain questions. There's the delivery batch size and whether you're doing it for the ease of the learners or the ease of the trainer. Um, there's the pricing and packaging considerations if you're a training vendor or a consulting vendor.
Yeah,
Because that's actually one of the big ones is how do you ensure availability of a trainer for 2 hours every Tuesday
yeah,
for an extended period unless you can load up 10 of these things in parallel. So there's a whole bunch of market dynamics and consumability by the market elements that go into building training that don't apply in an internal space right up until you have a lace full of coaches who have all the same practical considerations as a public consultant, even if you're all in the same building, um, even if it's remote, virtual, the
yeah,
same availability constraints for the delivering people and the receiving people start to come into play.
yeah.
I mean, how hard is it to get a recurring executive 2 hour time box every other Thursday for a 6 week, 8 week period?
I, I'm actually going to say on that front, it's a lot easier than getting 2 days.
I've had the opposite experience.
Really?
Yeah. Unless there's a convenient executive staff meeting that the CXO is willing to say, yeah, actually, yeah, use this 2 hour staff meeting I have every week. You can have it every other week for the next 2 months. I've had that happen. That's fine. But most of the time, it's actually easier to create a special moment to clear everybody's calendars than it is to get a reliable recurring where you're not missing a different person every time.
I will say probably where I've done series like that with execs, it hasn't been recurring the exact same time each week.
Hmm.
It's been become popular with the EAs because you want 6 times X minute sessions occurring at roughly 1 week intervals. And then they go and go, okay, what can we move around to make sure that we can get
Yep.
that to happen?
And you and whenever I asked for something like that at one company, I brought a Dr. Pepper for the A. At a different company, I brought a flower. Or, um, and you get to know the A's very well, and you treat them as priceless because they are.
Oh, they certainly are. Um, all right, so without opening that huge can of worms, we found something other than lean portfolio management to talk about for an hour.
You almost made it. We didn't say even the words, I don't think, in the opening, but I think we did say the words somewhere in the middle.
It was, yeah, the LPM boot camp was where we broke the golden rule. But
Yeah, I'm not going to count that one though. That was topical.
yeah, yeah. So,
But yeah, it was interesting. It was a different conversation. It was fun. Has me thinking about designing, and building training again.
what do you know?
What a great distraction. I've got plenty of focus available this month,
Well, you've got an MVP in the box for your workshop. So,
so I'm done. No further development needed.
well, you got to wait for feedback now.
Yeah, I'm still I'm 30 minutes of recording away from having the MVP in the box.
Well,
And the minimum viable reviewable component.
yeah.
So excited to share more about that maybe in a different stream. But with that, shall we wrap?
I'm going to suggest we do wrap. So, if you've been watching, thanks for joining us. If you watch this after the fact, hope you enjoyed our little travel down cohort-based training lane and didn't miss Rebecca's ability to provide us with really interesting topics.